The copper. That's what I remember most. Not the pain, not yet. Just the heavy metallic taste of blood filling my mouth and the way the kitchen tiles felt like ice against my cheek. I remember looking at the underside of the refrigerator. There was a stray dust bunny under there. Funny, isn't it? My life was ending, my jaw felt like it had been hit by a freight train, and I was thinking about how I'd missed a spot while cleaning. Get up, Elena. His voice wasn't screaming. That was the terrifying part. Marcus spoke to me with the same bored irritation he used when the dry cleaner lost a shirt. I said, get up. Stop being dramatic. You tripped. I looked up, my vision blurring. He was standing there, adjusting his cufflinks. He had a gala to go to. A gala for Young Entrepreneurs of the Year. He looked magnificent. He looked like a hero. And I was just a messy inconvenience on the floor. You hit me because I asked about the credit card statement, I whispered. Each word felt like a jagged piece of glass moving in my throat. He stepped over me. Literally stepped over my body to reach for his coat. I hit you because you don't know your place. You've become a nag, Elena. Grace doesn't nag. She understands that a man like me needs room to breathe. Grace, the mistress. The woman who had been living in the margins of our marriage for 2 years. The woman he was taking to the gala tonight while I stayed home to ice a fractured cheekbone. She can have you, I croaked. Marcus paused at the door. He turned back, a cold, mocking smile playing on his lips. He walked back to me, knelt down and gripped my hair, forcing my face up. She already has me. She has the house, she has the business, and by the time I'm done with the lawyers, she'll have the clothes off your back. You're nothing without my name, Elena. You're a waitress I pulled out of a dive bar. Without me, you're invisible. He let go, my head hitting the floor again. The door clicked shut. Silence. I lay there for an hour. Maybe 2. I watched the shadows of the trees dance on the ceiling. I realized then that I wasn't just bleeding from my mouth. I was bleeding out my soul. Everything I had built, the 10 years of supporting him, the long nights of doing his books, the sacrifices I made so he could climb the ladder, it was all being handed to a woman who hadn't even seen the climb. But Marcus forgot one thing. He thought he pulled me out of that dive bar. He forgot that I was the one who managed that bar at 21. I knew how to handle drunks, I knew how to handle thieves, and I knew how to wait. I crawled to the sink, pulled myself up, and looked in the mirror. My face was a map of his cruelty. I didn't cry. I just took a deep breath, tasted the copper one last time, and made a promise to the woman in the mirror. He thinks I'm invisible. Fine. You never see the ghost that burns the house down until the smoke is already in your lungs. I grabbed my hidden rainy day envelope from the back of the pantry, the one he never knew about. I didn't pack a bag. Bags make noise. I just took my keys, my burner phone, and the flash drive I'd been quietly copying files to for months. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Not once. Because the Elena who lived there was dead. And the woman who replaced her. She had work to do. You're probably wondering why I didn't go to the police right then. Why I didn't scream for help. It's simple. In Marcus's world, the police were his golf partners. To destroy a man like that, you don't go to the law. You go for the one thing he loves more than himself. You go for his legacy. And I was about to become the most expensive mistake he ever made. 6 years. Do you know how long 6 years is when you're living in a studio apartment above a laundromat in a city where nobody knows your name? It's 2,190 days of silence. It's 2,000 nights of eating ramen and staring at a corkboard covered in names, dates, and bank account numbers. I changed my name to Sarah. I dyed my hair dark, stopped wearing makeup, and took a job as a night shift bookkeeper for a construction firm. Became a shadow. The first 2 years were the hardest. I had to fight the urge to check his social media every hour. I had to resist the bile that rose in my throat when I saw his face on the cover of Business Insider, smiling with Grace on his arm. They looked happy. They looked golden. The caption read, "The power couple redefining tech logistics." I laughed so hard I choked. Logistics. Marcus couldn't organize a sock drawer without me. I knew the truth. I knew that the revolutionary algorithm his company used was actually a patched-together system I had helped code in our basement during the lean years. And I knew the vulnerabilities. "You okay, Sarah?" my boss Miller asked one night. He was a good man, silver-haired and tired. "Just a cough, Miller. Too much dust in these ledgers," I lied. "You're too good for this place," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You catch errors our last 3 accountants missed. Why are you here?" "I like the quiet," I said. And I meant it. In the quiet, I could hear the gears turning. I spent my nights studying. Not just accounting but forensic auditing. I learned how money moves when it wants to stay hidden. I learned about shell companies in the Caymans and consulting fees that were actually bribes. Marcus was arrogant. Arrogant men are predictable. They think they're too smart to get caught, so they leave a trail of breadcrumbs, confident that no one is brave enough to follow them. I was brave. I was also patient. I began to build my black box. It was a digital map of every offshore account Marcus had opened. Every time he cheated on his taxes, which was often, I logged it. Every time he over-leveraged the company to buy Grace a new diamond or a villa in Tuscany, I noted it. But I needed a way back in. I couldn't just show up at his door. I needed to be invited. By year 4, I started my own boutique consulting firm under a different alias. Vantage Group. I didn't have an office. I just had a reputation for being the person you call when you want to make a rival company disappear legally. I worked for his competitors. I learned their weaknesses. Became a ghost maker. I watched from the shadows as Marcus's ego began to outpace his bank account. He was expanding too fast. He was getting sloppy. Grace, it seemed, had expensive tastes that even a tech titan struggled to maintain. They were bleeding cash, and they were looking for a savior. I waited for the right moment. The moment when the golden boy felt the first chill of winter. It happened in the fall of the 6th year. Marcus announced a massive merger. If it went through, he'd be a billionaire. If it failed, he'd be bankrupt. He needed a clean audit. He needed a miracle. I sent an anonymous tip to his lead investor about internal discrepancies. Just enough to make them nervous. Just enough to make them demand an outside consultant to clean up the books. And who was the highest-rated, most discreet consultant on the East Coast? Vantage Group. When my phone finally rang and I saw the area code from my old life, my heart didn't race. Slowed down. I felt a strange, cold calm. Picked up. "This is Sarah," I said. "Sarah. This is Marcus Thorne. I'm told you're the best in the business at making problems go away." I looked at the scar on my jaw, barely visible now under the makeup, but still there. Still humming with the memory of that kitchen floor. "I am Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "I specialize in finding exactly what's been hidden." Walking into the Thorne Plaza was like walking into a graveyard of my own memories. The lobby was all marble and glass, the kind of expensive coldness Marcus always loved. My heels clicked on the floor, a rhythmic ticking clock. Your time is up." I wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit. My hair was pulled back into a tight, professional bun. I wore glasses I didn't need. I looked like a woman who lived for spreadsheets and hated fun. I looked nothing like the waitress he thought he'd destroyed. I was escorted to the top floor. The god level, we used to call it. The doors opened and there he was. He looked older. There were bags under his eyes that no amount of expensive moisturizer could hide. Grace was there too, sitting on the corner of his desk, looking bored and wearing a necklace that probably cost more than my first house. "Sarah, I presume," Marcus said, not even standing up. He was looking at his phone. "Some things never change." "Mr. Thorne." "Mrs. Thorne," I said, nodding to Grace. Grace looked me up and down, her lip curling slightly. "You look efficient. Marcus said you were a miracle worker. Hope you're fast. We have a flight to Paris on Friday." "I'm very efficient," I said, setting my briefcase on the conference table. "And I don't need much. Just full access to your internal servers, all physical ledgers from the last 5 years, and a private office where I won't be disturbed. Marcus finally looked up. For a split second, his brow furrowed. He squinted at me, a flicker of recognition dancing behind his eyes. My heart stayed steady. I had practiced this look in the mirror for months. The blank professional. "Have we met?" he asked. "I've worked with several of your associates, Mr. Thorne. Perhaps you've seen me at a conference." He shrugged, the moment passing. "Whatever. My CFO is a moron. He's panicked because the investors found a hole in the logistics reporting. Fix it. Smooth it over. I don't care how you do it, just make sure that merger happens." "I understand," I said. "You want the truth buried." "I want the company saved," he corrected. I was given a small office at the end of the hall. It was perfect. It was close enough to hear the gossip and far enough to work in peace. As soon as the door closed and I was granted server access, I didn't start fixing anything. I started digging. Within 3 hours I found it. It wasn't just tax evasion. It was worse. Marcus had been running a classic Ponzi-style inflation. He was reporting revenue from contracts that didn't exist, using new investor money to pay off the old ones. It was a house of cards held together by spite and arrogance. But then I found the special projects folder. It was encrypted with a password he'd used since college. Winnerty. I opened it and my breath hitched. It wasn't just business. It was personal. There were folders with my name on them. Folders containing private investigators' reports from the months after I left. He had tried to find me. Not because he missed me, but because he wanted to finish the job. I scrolled through photos of me. Grainy shots of me at the bus station, me at a diner in another state. He had followed me for a year, then stopped. Why had he stopped? I clicked on the last memo in the file. It was a bill to a cleaner in Chicago. The note read, "Subject lost. Assume neutralized or no longer a threat. See surveillance." He thought I had crawled away and died. He genuinely thought he had broken me so badly that I just faded out of existence. A knock on the door startled me. I minimized the screen just as Grace walked in, uninvited. She was holding a glass of wine, even though it was only 2 p.m. "So, Sarah," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "How bad is it? Can you save us, or should I start picking out which of the vacation homes we're going to lose?" She was testing me. She was the one who had encouraged his worst impulses. She was the one who had watched him hit me and said nothing. "The numbers are complex, Grace," I said, using her first name deliberately. She bristled. "That's Mrs. Thorne to you." "Of course," I smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. "Mrs. Thorne. I'm finding things your husband didn't even know were there. It's going to be a very interesting week." As she left, I realized I didn't just want to take his money. I wanted to take his sanity. I wanted him to feel the same walls closing in that I felt that night on the kitchen floor. And I knew exactly how to do it. I wasn't just going to report the fraud to the investors. I was going to make Marcus the one who pushed the destruct button himself. Have you ever seen a man start to doubt his own eyes? It's a slow, beautiful disintegration. I didn't just want to hand over the evidence to the SEC. That would be too quick. I wanted Marcus to feel the haunting. I wanted him to look into the mirror and see the cracks in his perfect reflection. I started small. During the day I was Sarah, the diligent auditor. I sat in meetings, nodded at the board, and reconciled the ledgers to keep the investors calm, or so Marcus thought. But at night, when the building was a hollow shell of glass and steel, I became the architect. I knew Marcus's office better than he did. I knew the passcodes, the hidden drawers, the way the air conditioning hummed. I began leaving echoes. On Tuesday, I left a single earring on his desk. Not just any earring, the pearl stud I was wearing the night he broke my jaw. The one he'd ripped out in the scuffle. I'd kept its twin for 6 years. I placed it right on his leather blotter, dead center. I watched through the glass partition. When he walked in, he stopped dead. He picked it up, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked around the room, frantic, checking the corners. He threw it into the trash can like it was a live coal. On Wednesday, I replaced his screensaver. It was supposed to be a photo of him and Grace on their yacht. Tweaked the code. Every hour, for just 1/10 of a second, faster than the conscious mind can process, the image would flicker. It would flash a photo of the dive bar where we met. Is something wrong with my computer? He barked at the IT guy that afternoon. Looks fine to me, Mr. Thorne, the kid said, scratching his head. Maybe just eye strain. You've been working hard. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. He was starting to unravel. He was snapping at Grace, accusing her of moving his things. He was drinking scotch at 10 a.m. But the real work was happening in the servers. I wasn't just cleaning the books. I was rerouting the special projects funds. I was creating a digital paper trail that led directly from Marcus's private account to a series of shell companies that looked like they belonged to Grace. I wanted them to turn on each other. In a marriage built on betrayal, trust is a very thin thread. One tug and the whole tapestry falls apart. On Thursday night, Marcus called me into his office. He looked wrecked. His tie was loose and his eyes were bloodshot. "Sarah," he whispered, leaning over the desk. "I think someone is in my head. Or someone is in this building who shouldn't be. This building who shouldn't be." I leaned in, my voice a soothing poison. "The numbers don't lie, Marcus. But sometimes the past has a way of balancing the books when we least expect it." He stared at me, his pupils dilating. For a second I thought he saw me. Truly saw me. But then the phone rang, the lead investor. The merger was 24 hours away. "Fix it," he hissed. "I don't care about ghosts. Just fix the goddamn money." "Oh," I said, standing up. "The money is already handled. You won't believe where it's gone." The genius of a man like Marcus is his ego. The downfall of a man like Marcus is also his ego. He couldn't conceive of a world where I had survived, let alone a world where I was smarter than him. Grace was the weak link. She was used to being the prize, the one who was taken care of. As the pressure of the audit mounted, she started to feel the heat. She didn't like the way Marcus was looking at her, with suspicion instead of lust. I made sure she found the evidence I'd planted. I accidentally left a folder on the communal copier. It contained fake transcripts of Marcus talking to a divorce lawyer, detailing how he was planning to pin the corporate fraud on her to save himself. It was a masterpiece of forgery. It detailed how he had opened accounts in her name to hide the stolen investor funds. I watched from the break room as she read it. Her hand went to her throat. The power couple was about to become a cage of vipers. "Sarah," she hissed, catching me in the hallway. Her eyes were wild. "What is this? This audit? What are you finding in the offshore accounts?" I looked around nervously, playing the part of the scared employee. I shouldn't say, Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Thorne told me to keep these files strictly between us. I'm his wife. I'm a partner in this firm," she screamed, losing her cool in front of the secretaries. It looks like there's a massive transfer of liability," I whispered, leaning in. "If the SEC steps in, whoever's name is on the Gold Leaf Holdings account is going to prison for 20 years. And Marcus told me that's your account." She turned white. "He's setting me up. That bastard is setting me up." She ran toward his office, her heels hammering like a drum roll for the execution. I followed at a distance, my heart beating with a cold, rhythmic joy. The scream that came from his office was primal. Glass shattered. I heard Marcus yelling about loyalty, and Grace screaming about the Cayman accounts. The staff stood frozen at their desks, watching the golden empire crack in real time. Marcus stormed out, his face purple. He saw me standing there. "You!" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Get into the system. Close the Gold Leaf account." "Well, she's trying to drain it." "I can't, Marcus," I said. My voice was no longer Sarah's. It was deeper, It was mine. What do you mean you can't? Pay you. Do it. I can't, I said, stepping closer, because that account doesn't belong to Grace. And it doesn't belong to you anymore either. The office went silent. Marcus froze. The IT guy, the secretaries, the junior partners, everyone was watching. He stepped toward me, his hand raising instinctively, just like it had 6 years ago. Who the hell do you think you are? He growled. I reached up and took off the glasses. I shook my hair loose. I stood under the bright fluorescent lights and let him see every line of the face he thought he'd erased. I'm the waitress you pulled out of a dive bar, Marcus, I said. And I've come to collect the tip. The look on his face. If I could bottle that moment and drink it, I'd live forever. It wasn't just shock. It was a profound, soul-deep terror. It was the look of a man who realized he hadn't been fighting a consultant. He'd been inviting the executioner to dinner for 2 weeks. Elena, he whispered. The name sounded like ash in his mouth. Grace stopped screaming. She stared at me, then at Marcus, then back at me. Who? Who is Elena? The woman who built this company, I said, looking her in the eye. The woman he told you didn't exist. The woman he beat until she couldn't stand, then left for dead. The office was so quiet you could hear the hum of the servers in the basement, the servers that were currently sending the final, unredacted files to the federal authorities and the lead investor simultaneously. You're crazy, Marcus laughed, but it was a high, thin sound. You have nothing. You're a ghost. I have the lawyers, I have the power. You think a few doctored spreadsheets will stop this merger? I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage before the sun goes down. Oh, I'm sure you'll try, I said, leaning against his expensive mahogany desk. But here's the thing about ghosts, Marcus. We don't have anything to lose. But you have everything. Or you did. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a recording. It was from 10 minutes ago. His own voice shouting at Grace. Of course I used the offshore accounts. I had to hide the money somewhere while the audit was happening. You think I was going to let the feds see the special projects budget? I'm the one who runs this show. I had bugged the office on day 1. That's a confession, Marcus. Recorded in a 2-party consent state. Maybe not admissible in every court, but in the court of public opinion. And more importantly, in the ears of your investors who are currently on a conference call in the next room listening to this live. He turned his head toward the conference room door. It opened slowly. The lead investors, the men who held the keys to his billion-dollar merger, walked out. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like a cockroach they'd accidentally stepped on. The deal is dead, Thorne, the lead investor said. And so is your career. We're calling the authorities. Marcus slumped. The air seemed to leak out of him. He looked small. For the first time in my life, I realized he wasn't a giant. He was just a bully with a good tailor. But I wasn't done. The money I'd rerouted. It wasn't in a shell company. I leaned in close to his ear, so only he could hear me. The gold leaf account. I changed the beneficiary yesterday. It's not mine. It's a trust fund for every woman who's ever called the domestic violence shelter I've been secretly funding for 5 years. Your legacy is going to pay for their healing, Marcus. Every single cent. He looked at me, his eyes filling with a pathetic, helpless rage. I'll kill you, he hissed. You already tried that, I smiled. It didn't take. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming. Marcus stood there, his hand still frozen in midair, a relic of a threat that no longer carried any weight. Behind him, Grace was trembling, not with sadness, but with a cold realization that she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. The power couple was a pile of ash, and the wind was picking up. Security! Marcus finally bellowed, his voice cracking. Get this woman out of my building. She's an intruder. She's a thief. 2 security guards stepped forward, but they hesitated. They'd heard the recording. They'd seen the investors walk out. They knew the difference between a boss and a man who was already a memory. Actually, I said, looking at the head of security, A man named Joe who I'd been bringing coffee to for 2 weeks. Mr. Thorne is no longer authorized to give orders. As of 10 minutes ago, the board has triggered the morality clause in his contract. He's been suspended pending a full criminal investigation. I held up my tablet. The board of directors, terrified of being sued by the investors, had moved faster than a shark smelling blood. I'd made sure they had the evidence they needed to protect themselves by throwing Marcus to the wolves. "Joe," I said softly, "please escort Mr. Thorne and his guest to the lobby. They are permitted to take their cell phones. Everything else stays." "You can't do this," Grace whimpered, looking at her Hermes bag on the desk. "My things are in there. My jewelry. Everything in this office was bought with company funds, Grace," I said. "And since the company is now under forensic audit, those are technically evidence exhibit A. I'm sure the feds will let you have your lipstick back in a few years." I watched them be led away. Marcus didn't go quietly. He kicked a trash can. He yelled names that would have made a sailor blush. But as the elevator doors began to slide shut, our eyes met one last time. In that second, the mask of rage slipped. I saw the hollow, terrified boy underneath. He realized that for the rest of his life, he wouldn't be Marcus Thorne, the Titan. He would be the man who got outsmarted by the woman he thought was nothing. I walked over to his chair, the big black leather throne he'd used to look down on the world. I didn't sit in it. Instead, I turned it around so it faced the window looking out at the city. I wasn't the queen of his empire. I was the one who had finally opened the windows to let the smoke out. But don't think for a second that Marcus was going to go to jail without a fight. A man like that always has a plan B, buried in the dirt. And as I sat in that quiet office, my burner phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Just 4 words, "I know where you live." He didn't go to his penthouse. He didn't go to the police. Marcus did exactly what I expected a cornered animal to do. He went to the one place I hadn't touched, the lake house. It was a secluded property 3 hours north, bought with clean money before the fraud began. It was his fortress. And according to the GPS tracker I'd slipped into his car weeks ago, that's exactly where he was heading. But the text meant he'd been doing his own digging. I looked at the message again. "I know where you live." He didn't mean my studio apartment above the laundromat. He meant the safe house where I'd been staying during the audit. He was trying to scare me. He wanted me to run so he could claim I was the one who stole the money. "Nice try, Marcus," I whispered to the empty office. I called Miller, my old boss from the construction firm. "Miller, it's time. Call your contact at the bureau. Tell them the bird has flown to the nest." "You sure about this, Elena?" Miller's voice was thick with worry. "He's desperate. Desperate men don't care about the rules." "I haven't cared about the rules for 6 years, Miller. I'll meet them there." I drove through the night. The rain was heavy, blurring the world into a smear of gray and black. My jaw was aching, a ghost pain that always flared up when I was close to him. I kept my hand on the steering wheel, watching the miles tick down. When I arrived at the lake house, his car was parked crookedly in the driveway. The lights inside were off, but I could see the faint glow of a cigarette on the porch. He was waiting for me. I stepped out of the car. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't need one. I had the truth, and in a world built on lies, the truth is the only thing that cuts deep enough to draw blood. "You actually came." His voice drifted through the dark. He sounded sober now. "Lethal." "You invited me," I said, walking toward the porch. "Though your invitation was a bit blunt." He stood up, the cherry of his cigarette fading. "You think you've won. You think because you scrambled some numbers and told some tales to the board, you've taken my life. But I built that company from nothing. Can build another. All I need is for you to disappear. For real this time." He stepped into the light of the porch lamp. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a folder, the physical copies of the original contracts I thought I'd destroyed. "These have your signature on them, Elena. The old ones. From the beginning. I found them in the floorboards of the old house. If I go down for fraud, I'm taking you with me. We started this together. We'll end it together. He smiled, that old, charming, predatory smile. He thought he'd found the ultimate leverage. He thought he could drag me back into the mud with him. What he didn't know was that I'd already talked to the district attorney. I'd already signed a confession for my part in the early days. I was prepared to go to prison to see him behind bars. The question was he? Is that it? I asked, stepping up onto the porch. That's your big move. You want to drag me to a cell next to yours. Marcus's smile faltered. You're bluffing. You love your freedom too much. You spent 6 years hiding like a rat just to stay out of my reach. You won't trade it for a jumpsuit. You never understood me, Marcus, I said, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of pity for him. You thought I stayed away because I was afraid of you. I stayed away because I was building. I was learning how to live without needing to be seen by people like you. I took a step closer, right into his personal space. I could smell the scotch and the desperation. I've already turned myself in. I lied, well, half-lied. I'd negotiated immunity in exchange for the offshore data. But he didn't need to know that. The feds are 10 minutes behind me. Those papers in your hand. They aren't leverage. They're just more evidence for the pile. He lunged at me then. It was a clumsy, pathetic move. He grabbed my throat, pinning me against the porch railing. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot and foul. I should have killed you that night, he hissed. I should have made sure you never got up. I didn't struggle. I didn't claw at his hands. I just looked him in the eye, my voice calm and steady. But you didn't. And that's the difference between us, Marcus. You think power is what you can break. I know power is what you can survive. I heard the sirens then, distant but growing louder. Blue and red lights began to dance against the trees at the edge of the property. Marcus froze. He let go of my throat, his hands shaking. He looked at the driveway, then at the lake, then back at me. He realized there was no exit. No more shell companies. No more mistresses to hide behind. Just him and the consequences of a decade of cruelty. What now? He whispered, his voice small and hollow. Now, I said, smoothing my jacket. The audit is over. And you're bankrupt in every way a man can be. I walked off the porch as the first police cruisers pulled into the gravel drive. I didn't look back when they tackled him. I didn't look back when they read him his rights. I just kept walking until I reached the edge of the lake. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, turning the water into a sheet of hammered gold. It was a new day. A real one. You think the story ends with a man in handcuffs and a woman walking into the sunset? Not quite. Because justice is a long road, and the hardest part isn't destroying your enemy. It's figure out who you are once the war is over. I had one more stop to make before I could truly be free. The trial was a circus. For 6 months, I was the star witness in a case that gripped the city. I watched Marcus sit at the defense table. His expensive suits replaced by the drab, ill-fitting attire of a man whose assets had been frozen. I watched Grace testify against him, trying to save her own skin by claiming she was just another victim. I didn't hate her. I just felt a profound, weary sadness for her. She was still looking for a man to save her, while I had learned to save myself. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and a litany of assault charges, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just walked out of the courtroom and kept walking. But there was one piece of the past that still tasted like copper. I drove back to that dive bar Marcus always mocked. It was called the Rusty Anchor. It wasn't a dive. It was a place where people with calloused hands went to forget their troubles for an hour. I walked in, and the smell of stale beer and floor wax hit me like a hug from an old friend. "Can I help you?" a young girl asked from behind the bar. She couldn't have been more than 20. She had a bruise on her arm she was trying to hide with a long-sleeved shirt. My heart twisted. I knew that look. I knew that shirt. I used to work here, I said softly. A lifetime ago. I sat at the end of the bar, the same stool where I first met Marcus. He had been so charming then. He'd tipped $100 on a $10 tab and told me I deserved better than this place. He convinced me that he was the better. I'm looking for the owner, I said. A man named Silas. Silas passed away 3 years ago, the girl said, her voice trembling slightly. His son runs it now, but we're closing down. The building was sold to developers. They're turning it into luxury condos. I looked around at the wood-paneled walls, the flickering neon sign, and the girl with the hidden bruise. The developers. I knew who they were. They were one of Marcus's old shell companies, now being liquidated by the state. How much? Yes. The girl blinked. How much for what? For the building. For the debt. For your freedom. She looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't moving money to destroy something. I was moving it to build. I pulled out my business card, the real one with my real name. Elena Thorne, director of the Glass Foundation. Tell the developers the offer is coming in tonight, I said. And tell yourself that you're not working the night shift anymore. You're going to help me run this place. But first, let's talk about that bruise. It's funny how the world works. Marcus thought he took everything from me on that kitchen floor, but all he really did was strip away the parts of me that were weak. He thought he left me with nothing, but he left me with the one thing he could never understand. A perspective from the bottom. I didn't turn the rusty anchor into a fancy bistro. I turned it into a sanctuary. The upstairs apartments became transitional housing for women who, like me, had walked out of their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The downstairs remained a hub, but now the profits went toward legal fees for victims of domestic and corporate abuse. Called it the glass house. Not because it was fragile, but because in this house there were no secrets. Everything was transparent. Everything was seen. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the state penitentiary. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The handwriting was jagged, pressured, and angry. I sat in my new office, the one above the bar where I used to scrub floors, and let the envelope sit on my desk for 3 days. When I finally opened it, it wasn't an apology. It was a plea. Elena, it read. The appeal is failing. They've taken everything. Grace is gone. My parents won't take my calls. You won, okay? You destroyed me. Now please. I know you still have access to the offshore accounts you hid. If you can just send enough for a better legal team, I'll never mention your name again. I'll disappear. Just like you did. He still thought it was a game. He still thought everything had a price. He thought the silence he had forced on me for years was something he could now buy back. Picked up my pen. I didn't write a long letter. I didn't list his sins or tell him how much I hated him. Hatred is a fire that requires you to stay close to the flame, and I was finally cold to the touch. I wrote one sentence on a piece of scrap paper. You told me I was nothing without your name. I'm finding that being nothing is the most powerful thing I've ever been. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and marked it return to sender. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the ledger was balanced. But a week later I received a phone call that changed everything. It wasn't from the prison. It was from a hospital. Grace had been involved in a domestic incident with the new man she'd fled to. History, it seems, was repeating itself. Walking into a hospital room and seeing the woman who replaced you, the woman who mocked your pain, lying in a bed with the same bandages you once wore. It does something to your soul. Grace looked small. The power couple glamour had vanished, replaced by the stark, clinical reality of a broken rib and a blackened eye. When she saw me walk in, she flinched. She expected me to gloat. She expected me to tell her, "I told you so." I sat in the plastic chair next to her bed. I didn't say a word. I just reached out and put a bottle of water on her tray. "Why are you here?" she rasped. Her voice sounded just like mine had 6 years ago. Jagged. Broken. "Because I know what it's like to believe the lie," I said. "And I know what it's like to think you deserve the hit." She started to cry then. Not the pretty cinematic tears she used to cry to get her way with Marcus, but deep, ugly, soul-cleansing sobs. He said I was different. He said you were the crazy one. I thought if I was perfect, he wouldn't get angry. It was never about you being perfect, Grace, I said, leaning in. It was about him being small. He needed to make us small so he could feel like a giant. I stayed with her all night. I didn't stay as her rival. I stayed as her witness. What do I do now? She asked as the sun began to rise. I have no money. Have no friends. I have nothing. I smiled, and for the first time it wasn't a sharp smile. It was a warm one. You have exactly what I had. You have a clean slate. And you have a room waiting for you at the glass house. If you want it. She looked at me in disbelief. After everything I did. After I let him treat you like that. The best way to destroy a man like Marcus isn't just to take his money, I said. It's to take away his power to turn us into versions of himself. I choose to be better. I hope you do too. Grace took my hand. In that moment, the last of the copper taste vanished from my mouth. The war wasn't just over. The peace had finally begun. But there was one final thing I had to do. One final message to the man who thought he could break a woman and call it logistics. A year has passed since that night in the hospital. Grace is our head of outreach now. She's incredible. She speaks to young women in universities about the red flags she ignored. She's found a voice she didn't know she had. As for me, I still live in that studio apartment above the laundromat. I could afford a penthouse now, but I like the sound of the machines. They remind me that things can always be washed clean. They remind me that life is a cycle of getting dirty and starting over. Marcus is still in prison. He'll be there for a long time. Every now and then I see his name in the news. Another lawsuit, another scandal. But he's a ghost to me now. He's just a name on a piece of paper in a file I've long since closed. People ask me if I regret those 6 years of hiding. They ask if I wish I'd just gone to the police at the start. My answer is always the same, no. Because those 6 years taught me that I am my own greatest investment. They taught me that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you engineer. I didn't just survive him. I outgrew him. I became someone he can't even comprehend. If you're listening to this and you're standing on your own version of that kitchen floor, if you're tasting the copper and feeling the cold tile against your cheek, I want you to hear me. The pain you feel right now, it isn't the end of your story. It's the forge. You are being tempered. You are being made into something that cannot be broken again. You might feel invisible. You might feel like a nothing. But remember this. The world is built on things that are unseen. The wind, the gravity, the fire in your soul. Those are the things that move mountains. Don't just wait for the smoke to clear. Be the one who lights the match that shows the truth. Your life is your own ledger. Make sure the final balance shows that you were worth more than they ever knew how to count. I am Elena. I was a waitress, I was a victim, and I was a ghost. Today, I am free. And that is a debt that has finally been paid in full. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.